All right. Well, I think it's time to go ahead and start. Listen, we are welcome to have you on the call today. And I'm very happy to have a topic here today that I think is of interest, obviously, to a lot of people. And it's really to talk about WebSphere Commerce version 9 and our real world insights into leveraging the product, going through an upgrade ourselves. And we want this to be very informative today. We have a great panel. And so we'll talk to you a little bit about what we're going to cover. This is being recorded today, so in the event that you can't stay for the entire duration, we will be sending out a link that you can also share with your colleagues and peers after we complete the webinar. So in terms of our agenda, we'll go through introductions and review who the panelists are. We're going to kick it off with what makes V9 different. We're going to talk about what the business benefits are. We're also going to talk about the migration paths. I know many of you on this call are probably on version 7 of WebSphere Commerce, potentially 9, and are thinking about, what does the effort look like and how do we go about moving to 9? So we want to cover that today. We'll talk about our own experience migrating the omni-channel applications that we have developed over the years here at LiveArea. And then we're going to get into a little bit more detail because there is a technology change associated with 9 as well, specifically around Docker containers, about where and how to run those with V9. And then we're going to show you a really neat demonstration today. I think that it's really going to come through with our partner Rackspace and something we worked on with them, which is really auto scaling. For everybody that's been a WebSphere Commerce user, you know how maybe difficult that's been to do with the current architecture, and it's now fully possible, and we'll walk through that. And finally, we'll finish it off with our assessment offer, which is really you're probably faced or from your management around justifying a move like this, an upgrade process, and we're here to help you do it. And we'll go through what that assessment offer is really here at the end of the presentation. So with that, we'll get into introduction. So a little bit about me. I'm Michael von Bodungen. I'm the VP of Solutions at LiveArea. About 20 years ago, I helped start the WebSphere Commerce practice for LiveArea. And we're probably one of the oldest and longest running business partners in this space. And we've had a lot of history, both designing, developing, implementing, and managing WebSphere Commerce solutions. With that, I'm going to ask Bob Balfe to do a quick introduction for him. Bob?
Sure. Hello, my name's Bob Balfe, and I'm a distinguished engineer for IBM, and I run the Watson Customer Engagement Technical Sales team.
Thank you, Bob. All right, Derek, if you go next.
Sure, I'm Derek Remund. I am a senior customer reliability engineer at Rackspace. I work specifically on our Google Cloud Platform team and sort of act as a senior architect for our business unit.
Great. Dominic?
Yes, good afternoon. This is Dominic Bellardo, and I've been with WebSphere Commerce for about 16 years now. I'm a senior manager within our Commerce Managed Services department, and I've been involved in migrations from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8. So I'm pretty sure we can do everything that's needed.
Jacob?
Hi, my name is Jacob Vandergoot. I'm a solution architect for LiveArea. I am one of the architects that was responsible for help building our omni-channel applications and integrations with WebSphere Commerce.
Thank you, Jacob. All right, with that, we'll jump right into a couple things. So if you're not familiar with who LiveArea is, as I mentioned, we started really 20 years ago. And for many of us that worked on the IBM practice, we came to the LiveArea company through an acquisition of CrossU, but in any event, we have this 20-year history of working with the product. And we have done not only implementations for our clients, we worked alongside of IBM on large and small implementations and also built products on top of WebSphere Commerce itself, including one of the first point of sales and call center applications on it. So we love the product and worked with it for years and really excited about what's happening here. The other company that's on the call and really sponsoring this webinar is Rackspace. Rackspace is really a strategic partner of LiveArea and is the largest managed services provider in the world, combining that with their hosting capabilities and their ability to work with any public cloud out there. We're really pleased to have them on the call today, and they were instrumental in really demonstrating the scalability of V9 that you're going to see today. So that's a little bit about us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Bob Balfe. Bob, can you talk us through what makes V9 different?
Yeah, absolutely. And this version is very exciting to me. I've been with WebSphere Commerce for a very long time. I've seen it grow into what it is today. And with version 9, you're really getting a modernized architecture for your e-commerce platform, where we're combining speed and flexibility with performance and scale and security. And you're going to see a really cool demo today on just what you can do with version 9 from a scalability perspective. And we also back that up with almost 25 years of feature and function. We consider our platform to have unmatched capability in the industry, and we're still a leader in the industry. And you mix that with the new architecture, and it just makes for a really, really great platform. And then lastly, what you're seeing added to the platform is artificial intelligence, i.e. Watson. So as the platform matures, even in the last year, I'm sure you have heard or have seen a lot of different areas that are affected by AI in the commerce portfolio. So let's keep going. So the technology foundation, is really interesting, because we still support the 3 primary delivery models, where we have an on-premise, managed, hosted, and SaaS. And it's all modern and fully REST enabled. So you're going to get an omni-channel commerce platform, basically with the flexibility of your choice on how you want to deploy this platform, and with the 3 that I just mentioned. And we've also moved to the Spring framework. So no more struts. Management Center and the tooling has been totally updated to the new to Spring, which is a lot more common in the industry today with regard to developers and users of Java, for instance. And then we also have a jQuery store template. No more Dojo. I mean, that should be music to anybody's ears. And we've also moved to Java Persistence API over EJBs. So once again, moving to a little bit more of a modern, concepts and techniques with regards to the way the platform is actually coded. And then Liberty Services actually separates the commerce services. So as you see more and more microservice type capabilities in the platform, we're going to be utilizing Liberty. And then, of course, Docker. The way we actually deploy it is through 4 different servers, and I'll get to that in the next slide. And this is the actual demo that you're going to see today of how you can, vertically and horizontally scale the platform utilizing Docker. So, and then I just want to add, I want to really push to the REST enablement of the platform, because that's really key. No, you can go to the next slide, because that's really key. And we're starting to see, partners like Zobrist Consulting having their product Mobicom, which is a purely headless storefront based on Facebook's React JavaScript platform. So, the proof is in the pudding. It's out there. It's available today. It's also a very modular architecture. So we have simplified the way the management of the platform is done. We've separated out the transaction server, the store server, the search server, and the extension server all into separate Docker containers. And this allows us to scale up and down the service that requires for more performance versus scaling the entire platform, as an example. So we have a lot less dependency among teams and services, so we can allow for faster innovation. So you don't have to sit there and spend so much time deploying changes to the server. And that brings me to the next really big piece, which is the externalized customizations. To me, this is a really huge deal, especially if you were in this commerce space back in the version 5 and version 6 to 7 upgrades. We didn't really have a good extension model, and it allowed for, partners to really, do a great job and deploy WebSphere Commerce in many different ways. But the problem is when you went to upgrade, a lot of that stuff made it difficult to actually upgrade some of our customers because of the level of customization. So with this new way of actually standardizing the way customizations are done and have it being separated in its own Docker container, it's almost zero downtime when you deploy customizations or even upgrades.
Hey, Bob, there's one point I think I wanted to make here too, right? And with the introduction of these Docker containers, right, you essentially get the software stack installed for you. So even if you continue to run it on-prem, gone are the days of where you have to download all the various fix packs and feature packs and things for every component in the system, right? You guys are just delivering a new Docker image with the fix in it if it's applied to, to the product as a whole, and people just accept the image, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And depending on whether you're running on Kubernetes, Mesos, or even Azure or Amazon EC2, you'll be able to take those Docker containers and essentially just swap them at runtime with literally zero downtime. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Taking in changes, it's no more bringing servers down, deploying yours, upgrading jar files or anything like that anymore. So it's completely optimized. Great question. All right, let's keep going. So I want to kind of just cover the customizations just a little bit into some detail here, because I think it's very cool the way that we've actually structured the external customization. It's basically a controller or task command extension that runs in a separate server. So the different types are pre-execution, post-execution, or replace execution. So we do have a lot of different ways that you can actually extend and customize the server without disrupting the actual platform code in any way, because it's deployed in its own server and essentially its own Docker container. Same thing with XC configuration. So things like, a command reg extension, or it's configured in a database instead of an ear modification. So no more deploying ears, shutting down servers, or doing any of the network deployment stuff that you would have normally done in the past. It's a lot more seamless going forward. And you could see over on the right here that we have the different digital commerce services and how they interact with the customization server through JSON and business, object data with context parameters and things like that. So basically, I just want to end this with, the traditional customization methodologies are still fully supported, but we give you a much more flexible customization experience if you move to the XC model. So even if you're thinking about moving, you could do, for instance, a lift and shift, and your storefront would still be on the transaction server, EJBs would still be in place. So you still have that option just to get to a containerized version of WebSphere Commerce and then slowly migrate your code over time to things like XC. So we do have a very flexible way of you moving to version 9 without being completely disruptive.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great points, and I think the migration path is really what's key for people to take away. It's not a forced rewrite. You can actually move to 9 and then migrate along the way. So Jacob, why don't you talk to us a little bit about some of the benefits to the business side of it? Bob hit the tech, but let's hear from you what you feel like the business benefits are.
Sure. And one of the big benefits from a business perspective, as well as from an IT perspective, is agility. With Docker containers and with the separation of the different containers, it allows us to be able to deploy faster and have a rollback strategy as well. So by simplifying the deployment, it really enhances our ability to react, build, deploy, test, and be able to react again. Which is a massive improvement over the previous deployment of WebSphere Commerce and how we had to build ears and deploy. Furthermore, WebSphere Commerce has much better AI integration with different technology, such as WebSphere Content Hub and Insights. For WebSphere Content Hub, not only can you start using WebSphere Content Hub to either build your own storefront or just integrate pieces of content that can be externally managed through our Watson Content Hub, but also the Management Center tooling is now integrated with Watson Content Hub. So as you upload content and tags are automatically determined and resolved by Watson, you can use search within Management Center to quickly identify and find that content and externally link that content using the IBM merchandising tools. So quite powerful because it allows you through the WebSphere 9 business tooling to integrate with Watson Content Hub directly.
And Jacob, I was just going to say this is also kind of becoming an area where the storefront is evolving, right? So with IBM's Watson Content Hub and the CMS capabilities, we'll see more and more people in the future kind of designing their storefront in this true separation, if you want to call it, right, from the back end.
Exactly, with a microservices based architecture and through REST interfaces. Gone are the days where you have to use WebSphere Commerce, storefront API and technology, and you can build your own unique storefronts and integrating with the exact same business logic layer, as well as getting all the security benefits that WebSphere Commerce has always offered in the past as well. Another good example of integration of AI tools is Commerce Insights. WebSphere Commerce also now allows you to integrate with Commerce Insights, so now the merchandisers have a better understanding of what their consumers are actually doing and to make better merchandising decisions. So with the integration within the tooling itself in the back office, it's really now empowered the merchandisers to have more of a visibility to what their consumers are actually doing so they can promote things and make smarter choices.
Yeah, and Jacob, I wanted to call out here too, I think the really neat thing too, and you can kind of see IBM's thinking and what they're doing is they're really trying to build tools like Commerce Insights that really are based on what the business user does on a day-to-day basis in their job. And so the drag and drop to promote and demote products based on sales and forecast and variance figures they see or inventory, to me, it just speaks to sort of the inflection point that IBM has really gone to really make it, design-driven, focused work. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things about what's happening with 9 and the tools like this that are AI powered.
Exactly.
All right, so I think, Jacob, there are plenty of people on the call that want to understand what are the migrations paths, and Bob alluded to a little bit in his discussion, but why don't you start to talk to us about kind of the path and what we've learned in our own journey?
Okay, so if you're similar to a lot of clients that we've been working with, and with the version 7 end of life support being announced for next year, a lot of people are wondering, well, is V9 a rewrite? Do I need to upgrade to V8 just from end of life perspective, or should I go for V9? Well, really, one of the key artifacts is if you really want to take advantage of everything WebSphere has provided to you, an upgrade to V8 to V9, in order to really take the business advantages, you really want to upgrade to the latest storefront that was introduced in one of the latest feature pack of V7. And the benefit of that, if you've done that, is not only you get Page Composer, but that storefront was really the cornerstone of starting to do REST-based integration between the storefront and the actual business logic that really sets the stage for containerization and the architecture that V9 is really promoting, and from a deployment perspective as well. So if your thought process is whether I should go to V8 versus V9, the next slide's perfect, actually, Michael. Really, the question is why wouldn't you go to V9? Because V9 gives you all the benefits that V8 gives you, and it gives you so much more, such as Docker, which is a much easier way to manage your application, deploy your application, and as well as now from an architecture perspective, the microservices-based architecture is really setting the stage, allowing your application and your solution to evolve to match how technology is just evolving to begin with. And Bob mentioned the key point, lift and shift. So in migration to V9 does not mean that it's a total rewrite. You can take your current version 7 implementation, deploy it as is, and I'll get a little bit more into that in the next slide, into a V9 architecture and solution, and then gradually migrate your storefront to this microservices-based architecture. And it's also important to call out, now that IBM is moving to a micro-based services architecture, they're not just saying they can support microservices, they make sure these microservices perform and have the security and the reliability that we can expect from IBM. Since their storefront is built based off of that, we know that they're betting and they're building a solution that is scalable, and it's just not an interface that you could call to, but they're leveraging the same thing. So let's talk about what is the impact migrating to version 9. And it's really, let's talk about code. If you're like me, I'm a technical developer, so I like to understand from a code perspective. And the first thing, as Bob mentioned, the upgrade to JPA. And what does that mean? So no longer are there entity beans. All WebSphere Commerce entity beans and access beans have been upgraded to JPA. So how does that impact your customizations? Well, IBM did create an access bean wrapper to wrap all their existing JPA interfaces or JPA objects now, which was great because from a code perspective and a migration perspective, most of the code impact can be solved via simple find and replace and a pattern-based tooling, which IBM actually provides a tool for to either identify potential code changes or actually make those code changes yourself. So while there is an impact to move to JPA, the effort on fixing it is not is more tedious from a repetitive development perspective, but nothing that really needs a lot of core changes within your application. The next question is, I've created custom entity beans. Do I need to migrate to JPA? And depending on how you've created your entity beans, the answer is probably yes. But with using Rational as your tooling, there are already tools to make it easy to create these JPA artifacts. And IBM has already created all the registration points. So to create JPA artifacts for your existing entity beans is not very difficult. The tooling really helps to accelerate that. And the only thing you need to be aware of is those access bean wrappers that IBM uses. There doesn't seem to be a way to create your own version of them, but creating DAO objects to access your JPAs as per IBM's Knowledge Center is a very simple and a very easy alternative with very minor code impact that has to be changed. The last thing I want to reference is session beans, and I thought it was important to call out because as part of the EJB 3.0 spec, access beans have been deprecated, and so no longer you can introduce access beans in 3.0 EJB 3.0 modules. However, IBM again has provided a simple utility method to access your session beans. So there will be a little bit of impact, but again, most of your impact will be solved by simple find and replace within your code. Now, the next thing to talk about, as Bob alluded to, is the XC programming model. And does that mean I have to change all my customizations? And I think the key point, as Bob mentioned in the slide, is the old existing customization paradigm still holds true today. So your task commands and your controller commands that you've implemented in your version 6, version 7, version 8 system, they still work today. IBM still had those API compatibility rules, which I knew about when I worked in IBM, and they still maintain them. And as such, methods and APIs that you depended on from a previous release, more than likely, they may have some slight changes, but they exist in the current version 9 release, which is great because if you've customized or created a task command or used an extension point, it's very, very much likely that that extension point will exist in the version 9 system. So those customizations you've created would work. Of course, some minor code changes due to entity beans and some some changes that are, just happens over upgrades, but the actual changes are not as bad.
Now, Jacob, I know we may need to accelerate here a little bit. You want to touch on the last two bullets, and then we'll get to the point of kind of what our experience was?
Yep. So microservices, I just want to call out, is IBM has made it easy to take existing controller commands and data beans and expose them as a REST service. That will really help you integrate into a store container if you've used data beans. And the last point from a storefront migration, the existing struts module still exists, but deployed in the transaction server. And that is really what helps to facilitate the lift and shift model that Bob referred to earlier in this presentation. So now let's talk about our experience, and then I will pass it on. So just to give you a high level, we've built omni-channel application that leverages WebSphere commerce and integrates them through both HTTPS and JMS protocols. And it's a significant application. There's 80,000 lines of code, about 170 controller commands and task commands. We did use a lot of JDBC and less focus on the entity beans, but we used some as well as session beans. I think one of the key points, though, is most of our customizations really focused on the transaction server directly. So the process that we've done was we took our customizations, we imported the projects into the development environment, and then using the pattern-based find and replaces as well as the IBM tools to identify and fix some code, we were able to what seemed to be a daunting task and millions of compile errors. We were able to correct, I would say, about 70 to 80% of our compile errors through basically finding and replaces, which, that's pretty amazing to say 70% of all your compile errors can easily be fixed. The next, after we did that effort, what we did was we had to change exception handling. So unfortunately, the exception handling is different when you move to JPA, and as such, there was lots of areas in our code that caught remote exception, EJB exceptions, and they had to be addressed as well. Again, this wasn't significant development thought effort. It was just tedious and just took some time. The last, and I would say maybe this was about 5 to 10% of the effort that we've done, was really dealing with any of the other APIs that may have slightly changed as we built this 80,000 lines of code integration. It wasn't a lot. There were a few APIs that were changed, but overall, within 2 days, we had our application compiling and started within the development environment. The last thing I wanted to touch on is entity beans. We did migrate those as well. Again, using the rational application developer tooling, it was quite simple. And the only, as part of this effort, is we created those DAO objects as per the knowledge center instead of trying to emulate access bean wrappers. And again, because we've only had a handful of entity beans, it wasn't a difficult task. The key is, after everything was said and done, we tested. And there were a few little things that we had to look at and little snags that from like a transaction perspective and little differences. But overall, within a couple of days, our omni-channel application that first started with thousands and thousands of compile errors was up and running, which is quite amazing when you were almost thinking that V9 is a complete rewrite. So it really helped to emphasize a lift and shift type of thing, that V9 isn't a rewrite, and going to V8 or going to V9, there's really no good reason why you wouldn't want to.
Jacob, thanks a lot for walking through that. And I think what you've highlighted really is just the process of migrating the code is really not that daunting. So that really leaves us with the next topic, which is, what does it mean to run V9? What does it mean to deal with Docker containers and container orchestration engines? And for this piece of the presentation, we're going to hear from Derek. So Derek, you want to give us a little overview of what it takes to kind of run this at scale?
Sure. So I'll try to be brief so we can get to the demo. So WebSphere v9 being containerized needs an orchestration engine. An orchestration engine basically coordinates what physical systems containers run on, ensures they have appropriate resources, schedules the running of those containers. It's kind of a core management component to any containerized environment. There are several orchestration engines out there. Docker Swarm is kind of one of the early ones, DCOS, Kubernetes, which came from Google's internal compute platform. V9 is container orchestration engine agnostic. By using Docker container formats, it maintains that agnosticity. But for the purposes of this demo, we're using Kubernetes, which has kind of become the market leader. At this point, the three major public clouds, AWS, Azure, and Google Compute Engine, have all adopted Kubernetes as a container orchestration engine as a service with varying degrees of maturity. But it's become kind of the market leader at this point, so we're focusing on that today. So when we look at the structure of a Kubernetes environment, I just want to briefly go over it so we're kind of all on the same page. Essentially, you have a Kubernetes master, which runs replication controllers, and then you have various nodes that run the actual containers for the application. Those nodes will group containers together into what are called pods, and then those pods are used to expose services. And so that's kind of when you talk about microservices, you could have a service that contains basically a definition of ports and protocols on which the application communicates with those services. Now, for v9 specifically, if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see how it gets placed into containers. On each of these nodes, this is just, if you go back one slide, on each of these nodes, you can see a few different services being exposed. So you have app containers for the database, app containers for application components, for web front-end components, for the search master. This diagram isn't a complete diagram of every container that would be involved. This kind of shows you how containers would then be distributed among the nodes. In this case, we see just 2 nodes, but in a production application, you could have a large number of physical nodes. So then once you have that deployed, if we go to the next slide, you really have to choose kind of where you want to do this containerization. So for the purposes of this demo, we're doing it on Google Kubernetes Engine. The reason we chose that is that Kubernetes, being the market leader orchestration engine, it also originated at Google. So GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine, gives us an as-a-service platform on which to run our Kubernetes workloads. It's a very mature solution, so that gives us access to best-in-class compute capabilities on the underlying systems from Google, as well as easy provisioning and scaling, and it also integrates really well with the rest of GCP. So you'll see in the demo kind of all the nice monitoring and scaling capabilities that using Google Kubernetes Engine to run these workloads gives us out of the box.
And Derek, I just want to make a point here. It's fair to say Kubernetes is open source, right? Which gives everybody a chance to use it and run it. So if there's somebody that wants to run it in-house on-prem, they can do it. But our perspective is that the public clouds out there, including IBM, all have experience running this in at scale. And so you should think long and hard about whether you want to take this on yourself versus do it, where it's already kind of up and running as a service, as you mentioned earlier, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. The open source nature of Docker, kind of leads to the open source nature of Kubernetes, which leads to the ability to run it really anywhere. So once you're adapted to using Docker and Kubernetes based workloads, you can not only more easily move between the public clouds or on-prem, but even hybridize between them. By using Kubernetes as your orchestrator, you could be running containers on AWS, on IBM Cloud, on-premises environments, on Google, and hybridize in that fashion with a single orchestration engine. So one of the big benefits of going to a containerized environment gives you the ability to do a variety of scaling, whether manually or automatically. And I just want to cover those types really fast. So within each node, we have the various pods running. Those are running the actual containers. And we can both vertically and horizontally scale those. We can increase resource allocations to the individual pods, or we can horizontally scale by having new pods automatically spun up for each service. As the metrics are detected that require that increase. And typically that's CPU, but it could be other custom metrics as well. On Google specifically, we can use integration with the stack driver monitoring platform to use a variety of metrics. Now that's scaling on pods within the cluster, but you may also want to scale the cluster itself. And this is where the public cloud capabilities come in. Obviously, if you're running Kubernetes on physical on-premises hardware, adding additional nodes means data center activities to do that. In a public cloud, we can use the cluster scaling capabilities to automatically assign additional cluster nodes to the Kubernetes cluster. So that lets us horizontally scale, or we can vertically scale by just assigning additional resources to the nodes in place. But the great thing about Kubernetes is these containers can be started and stopped and moved around on these nodes, and so we can scale without downtime, and we can adapt quickly to changing workloads. So before we hop into the demonstration, I'm just going to let Dominic bump in here and cover anything additional you want to talk about regarding the move to V9, particularly how we perform this demo.
Sure. Thank you, Derek. So, as everybody has stated here, we start from a image that comes from IBM, for each individual server that we're going to stand up. And it comes complete with all the software, but there are still some requirements that we needed to work through in order to get this up and running. One of the things that was quick to notice for us was there is no longer a concept of a network deployment manager. So in the past, where you would go into your deployment manager, set your passwords, configure your JDBC connections, configure JMS, the data replication, all those things that you used to do that way. Now, because these servers all have to be able to go up and down and be created or recreated on the fly, you have to go through and set up how that process is going to occur. IBM has given us the capabilities to run commands prior to building the image, so that way the image startup is quick. And then there's also components that you have to enable after the startup, so that they can communicate with each other. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we started out with the base 9.0.0.0 images. We installed DB2 as a application running on a VM, and we got it up and running and tested out. From there, we decided, it'd be nice to get to an environment up and running quickly if we can run DB2 in Docker as well. So we went ahead and we created a DB2 Docker container, and you can do that for development. It's not recommended for production. Obviously, you're still going to want to run that with its own environment, but it does make it easy to get up a new development stream or a new environment for testing out a new feature, function, or wherever it may be. We took it one step further because we wanted it to be as automated as possible, and we took database backups from an authoring and a live environment, and then when we stand up our database server, you tell it what you want, and it'll come up with the appropriate database matching that. So you're ready to go, and you're up and running and testing pretty quickly. And then to speak to the ease of upgrade, that, as everybody's already stated, that is a huge commitment to go out there and apply updates to the many different components. So before we turned it over and set it up for our load testing, we went through the 9.0.0.0 to 9.0.0.1 upgrade. And it's really as simple as changing a configuration file to pull the new image from your registry, rebuild your container, and off you went. We ran into very little issues, none actually, when we did that upgrade process before turning it over.
Awesome. Well, Dom, thanks for walking us through that. Derek, we ready to kind of have you talk us through the demo? Hey, Derek, are you still with us?
Sorry about that, muted.
Yeah.
Yes, what we have here is the GCP console and the Google Cloud Shell, as well as a load generator VM we're going to use to generate some load. So you can see we have a WebSphere cluster we spun up. So this is our Kubernetes cluster. We've got 12 vCPUs, 45 gigs of RAM created. We can go into the UI in GCP, and we can take a look at the cluster configuration itself. So we can see that we have 3 nodes. We can see the version of Kubernetes that the nodes are running, as well as the workloads that are running on them. So you can see we've deployed a variety of containers for use for running WebSphere v9, and Dom and the others kind of went over kind of how we accomplished that. So we're going to head to start our load test. We're going to use a tool called Taurus, which is going to orchestrate the load test with JMeter and give us some nice graphs, nice pretty things to look at while we run the load test. So we're starting the load test now. It'll take a minute to get loaded up, so we'll just fast forward a little bit there. All right, so now we've got requests being handled. You can see we've only set a couple so far. We're tracking our response codes there. And obviously everything's 200 so far because we really don't have much load yet as we're ramping up. So we'll continue. We'll take a look at the pod status. You can see that they've started to take a little bit of CPU usage, but it's still pretty low. But we're going to see a spike pretty shortly here, and we want to be ready for it. And that's why we created the horizontal pod autoscaler so that we can scale as that load increases. So we'll fast forward a little bit more, and we should start to see some spikes in utilization. So you can see we've got a little bit of additional utilization happening, and now we've really hit a big spike. So load has begun to spike as our user load that we've generated with Taurus starts to increase. And you can actually take a look in the workloads in the UI, and you can see that the effects of that. So you can see the additional deployed containers. You can see the overall deployment usage, resource usage across the clusters. You can see that's continued to increase. We can look at the workloads to see the containers that have been created. So the new pods are already in the GKE UI, so they're administratable through there. We can also see the current autoscaler status right there in the UI. So if you don't feel like poking around the command line, all this is available in the UI. You can see that new pods are also appearing in the stack driver monitoring console. 6 of 8 are there so far. It takes a few seconds for them to show up the first time. You can see that the load is spiking a little bit too fast to completely balance evenly between the pods because we're just spiking it up really quickly. But over time, if we kept this on for quite a while, that would eventually even out as sessions ended and new sessions began. So we'll fast forward a little bit more here. And if we take a look in Stackdriver, you can see that individual load is now reducing on the pods. So we'll keep fast forwarding. You can see that we have a lot of additional pods now. We've scaled again to 32 replicas. And if we grab the deployments from Kubernetes, you can see that we are indeed up to 32. It shows the scale both in the command line there as well as in the UI. So you can see that we have a very large number of containers running. So this is all in the space of a few minutes. We've scaled up from a couple of containers to nearly 40 containers. As we approach the end, you can see here that in Stackdriver, load is really evening out across those containers. The first few had huge spikes of load as they had to take so many requests that they couldn't handle. But now load is really evening out across those containers, improving the user experience greatly. So as we fast forward a little bit more, you can see we've scaled to our maximum pod set. We actually still have a little more load we could take. We could continue to scale higher, but for the purpose of the exercise, we're going to let the load peter out, and we'll let it calm down a little bit and start to scale down. So you can see that Stackdriver is looking a lot calmer. As we've hit 40 pods, we've had much more even load across the pods, and they're under 1 second per second usage, which means they're under maximum CPU usage. So now our customers should have a much better experience. So you can see that now that the load has evened out, scaling down is starting to happen. So we've gone from 40 pods to 19 pods, and we'll continue to scale down every few minutes over time. You can see that the pods and the HBA are both showing the lower utilization in the UI here. Another cool thing is you can track the scaling events. So in the UI, you can see when scaling was requested and when it actually occurred successfully. And so, for the purposes of just going back and understanding how your scaling happens, you can do that. You can also look directly in the combined YAML output config of the entire cluster, which will show you exactly what's happening with the deployments, the current status, and all the configuration variables. So you can grab that as a record if you want to modify it in place, etc. So the load has subsided. We'll continue scaling down. Every 3 minutes or so, a new scale down event will occur. But we don't need to watch the rest of that scale down over time. We can go ahead and pause the demo at this point, but it'll continue to scale down every 5 minutes until we reach 0, or rather 2, because we set 2 containers as our minimum to maintain our application uptime.
And Derek, this is Michael. I wanted to call out one thing. So in this case, we were scaling the store server, right? The CRS server, but yes, in a real live production environment, your Solar servers would probably be replicating the transaction servers, right?
Exactly.
The customization servers. And to me, that's the real benefit of going to Docker and Kubernetes, is that you really get to treat the whole physical node system as kind of one giant cluster, right? And your orchestration engine just makes use of the equipment as best as it can, right?
Yeah, the great thing is Kubernetes is going to put containers where they need to be for best resource utilization. If you need to keep certain containers together from a latency perspective or whatever, you can put them into pods and they will be grouped together on appropriate nodes in the physical cluster. And then the other great thing is you can use the HPA, the horizontal pod autoscaler, to individually scale the different workload types. So that means that you aren't monolithically saying scale up all the resources in the application. Instead, you're saying, hey, we're noticing greater resource demand on the search subsystem, then just scale the search subsystem automatically. Greater on the store servers, then scale the store servers automatically. But you can scale those workloads independently, which means that your utilization kind of graph most closely follows your actual utilization of your hardware, which means your cost is also going to as closely follow that as possible, especially in a public cloud environment. So that really helps with aligning your costs with your actual utilization while maintaining the user experience.
Yeah, I think that's also a point to call out. With V9, you really should have the ability to use the equipment, what underlies the hardware, the servers themselves, in a much more efficient way. And I think if any of you follow Bob Balfe's blog, you can Google it. He's got a great blog post out there about the cost savings that really come with being able to leverage a technology like Docker. So, there's other, monetary benefits to the move to 9. So listen, Derek and Dominic, that was great. So thank you for walking us through that. I think real quick, we wanted to just say a few things about, what about Rackspace and LiveArea for hosting and managed services? As you can probably see, there is a change in technology from what we went to, or what we're used to from version 7 and 6 and 5 in the early days when WebSphere application server is really the core framework that the application was written in. The move to Docker really changes that, and I think it is a new step forward, but it's definitely where the industry is going as well. And I think hopefully what Derek and Dominic demonstrated to you today is that we figured this out, and we spent a lot of time thinking about how to do it at scale. So whether you're doing $1 billion online or up, or you're even down in the 20 million online, we can help you through that journey and how to leverage the technology to be able to function in the right way. And with that, we bring expertise, the cost efficiency of doing this for many clients, especially in the case of Rackspace, who does it for thousands of clients. And any of you that aren't familiar with Rackspace before, they're known for their fanatical support. They're engineers that go above and beyond, the call of duty, are actually awarded a straitjacket for kind of the craziness level that they get to. So it's a really neat thing. And then obviously there's a great deal of automation and their access to all the public cloud providers, from Google to Amazon to Microsoft and IBM. Being a big player in the industry, you have a lot of access to talent. And I guess, Derek, is there anything else you'd like to kind of add to that? But
I think you covered it pretty well. My team is dedicated to GCP, but we also have teams dedicated to all the major public clouds, as well as on-prem hardware, et cetera. Really, all of these factors kind of play into the way that Rackspace can ensure that you're successful with your cloud transition.
Yeah, and I would just highlight too, Dominic, who you heard at the start of the call, and Jacob, both of them. Dominic, 16 years experience, with the platform. Jacob, it's really about the equivalent. So we bring the expertise of really understanding what the application does to the table. So the combination, I think, is one that's proven, and we got the customer references to back it up. And finally, I guess, Derek, you may want to talk to this one. I think it also speaks to the credibility of your of Rackspace as well.
Yeah, sure. So Google has chosen Rackspace to be their first and premier managed services partner for GCP. So GCP, the reality is it's kind of the third major public cloud to come to fruition, right? But they are growing at an extremely rapid rate, $30 billion investment in the last couple of years in their cloud. Having worked with all the public clouds, I can say that technologically GCP is just incredible. But they have some catch up to do from a marketing, communication, sales perspective. And that's really what Rackspace is here to help GCP do. We're here to help them deliver the kind of high level of service that enterprise customers expect. That is what my team is all about, is providing that reliability, predictability, scale that folks who run mission critical applications expect. And I think that's why Google chose Rackspace as their premier partner.
All right, thank you, Derek. So I wanted to cover our offer to you. So we've spent time telling you about what's new with 9, what the benefits are from the tech and the business side. We've talked about our own experience migrating the applications that we built. You've obviously seen the demonstration. So our goal today was to really let you see the scale, the expertise, that we bring collectively to the table, especially in our partnership with IBM over the last 20 years. So what we are offering to you is really a workshop that's free to you to take advantage of. We will come on site, or we can do it over the phone, preferably on site, and we will sit down with you and do a V9 migration approach assessment. And really what we deliver out of that is the recommended migration approach. We know many of you have customized the product over the years. You've made changes to it. You may say, you know what, I hear you. You say it's just lift and shift, but you know, you're going to have to kind of prove it to me. We'll look at it with you, look under the covers at the code and how things have been done, and then help you come up with what the timeline and estimated hours look like to do that. We can also help you through, you know, TCO analysis if you're still thinking I need to keep this in-house versus going to a hosted managed services kind of environment, whoever you may choose to do that with. But we hope you take us up on this offer. We hope you've enjoyed, you know, the webinar today and got a lot through it. As I mentioned, we will send it out in an email link so you can see the replay as well. We covered a lot of ground from that perspective. So at this point, we did want to open up for Q&A. I know we ran probably a little bit longer, but Corey, if you want to help with just the Q&A side of it, that would be great.
Yep, absolutely. We'll just take a question or two, given everyone's time. Let's see what we've got here, if any questions are coming in. Okay, it looks like we have one question on how much of my code am I going to have to rewrite?
Got it. Jacob, why don't we let you take that one?
So that's a great question, and there's no real magic answer, right? Because you'll have JSPs, you'll have the storefront. What we will know based off the workshop and basically the migration strategy is how we would basically approach your migration to the V9 platform, whether we would do a lift and shift and then eventually exploit microservices architecture, or whether we could actually jump into that venture right away. That's what the workshop would be for. When it comes to the transaction server, I would almost say almost every piece of code that uses Axis beans today will be touched. Again, it's a lot of code that will be touched, but not a lot of effort and thought process has to be given to what the changes need to be. When it comes to the storefront, because JSPs are quite different from a technology perspective and how you'd interact with data beans, that one would be a little bit more interesting. And again, because of the IBM infrastructure and framework, being able to expose controller commands and data beans as REST services, they have made it much simpler for you to easily transition that type of JSP customization to the microservices model. So the long of it, it's not an easy answer to give you of how much code, but there's definitely a process where it's not as daunting or as mentally challenging as one would think.
Thank you, Jacob. All right, Corey, any other questions?
Yep, we'll just take one more here. We have a question on, is Accelerator deprecated in V9?
Bob, I think, you know, I don't know if you want to answer this one.
No, it's not. Yep. It's not deprecated, and unfortunately, it still requires IE.
Okay, great. Did we want to take another one or close it up given time?
I know we're a little over. I don't know. We can do one more, Corey.
Okay. If a solution requires customizations that can't be done in XC, do you recommend that all customizations are done using the traditional model or a hybrid of traditional and XC where possible?
I'd say Jacob or Bob.
I can take that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple things. I mean, we're continuously extending the XC model based on customer and partner feedback. So I think the first thing to do would be to check with your partner or your IBM rep to see if we're working on it. But try to stick to the XC model as much as possible, regardless. Like we said, you can still do customizations the old way when needed. I would just try to really limit it as much as you can.
Thanks, Bob. All right, Corey, I think we should probably wrap it up.
Yep, that's it. So we're good on the questions.
Okay. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. Please take us up on that offer and don't hesitate to reach out. And I just want to thank all of our panelists and the people that helped organize this today as well. Thank you for joining, and have a great afternoon.